Today we can, they move freely through the country without any violent people crossing the street. So, is more. In fact, we were criticized for removing the Ministry of Women. When we arrived, there were the equivalent of 24 ministries, and we reduced them to 9, and today there's now 8. Interestingly, one of the ministries we eliminated was the Ministry of Women. Critics claimed femicides would skyrocket, but femicides have actually dropped 14% under our administration, and we now have the lowest crime rates in history. It all came down to decisions, courage, and enforcing the law. Those who do wrong pay the price, and it's working. That's what I can share from Argentina's experience. Some of these lessons can be exported to other countries, but each country has its own idiosyncrasies, and I'd say it's quite, let's say, inappropriate to give advice for another country. So I couldn't imagine recommending to another country what to do. I simply want to tell you how it was, experience from a highly conflictive country like Argentina.
Just going back to what you've achieved is probably the biggest economic transformation of any country in our generation. I'm still wondering, how worried are you? I've interviewed world leaders that are currently in jail, and many have faced assassination attempts. How concerned are you? Has there been any attempts on your life that are not public? Are you worried that the opposition or the entrenched parties escalate their fight against you? Or that ship has sailed and the change has already been integrated into the economy and the resistance has eased up?
I just don't care. I'll do what I have to do. I'm not inventing anything. I am not, in fact, I'm not inventing anything. I'm simply applying the best techniques and practices in political management. And I have nothing to fear, because I'm acting for the well-being of Argentines. The results speak for themselves. Sure, there may be consequences from having disrupted vested interests. Well, it is part of life itself. Therefore, what I'm not going to allow myself to miss this opportunity to do what I believe must be done. If I've spent years saying something needs to be done in a certain way, I'm not going to negotiate that. I'll do it sooner or later, but I will. And then the consequences, we'll see. I mean, I understand how dirty politics is, and that I've upset a lot of entrenched interests. There may be backlash. But I take comfort in knowing that at all times, everything I do is within framework of the law. So, that is my tranquility. And then, look, we are all exposed to risks. So, let's say, so what's the point of living if not to do the right thing and fight for your dreams? So, that's why I'm not afraid of anything.
You said we all face risks, but I feel like a lot of these world leaders, they're in a position where they can go to the extreme to do what's necessary, or start meeting opposition parties or the entrenched parties somewhere in the middle. It's like, all right, look, I know you want to achieve this, Mr. President, but let's just meet halfway. Otherwise, and they threaten you. Have you faced those threats? What I'm trying to understand is behind the scenes, what were those discussions like? What were those challenges like? Because I don't think everyone has your mentality and kind of bulldozing through it all with a chainsaw.
Yes, but I'm not going to back down. I design policy in ethical and moral terms. So, it's like I told you, I despise the theory of justice as the middle ground. I call it the dictatorship of concave functions. When you have a concave function, one that rises, peaks, it reaches a maximum and then declines. Then the maximum is somewhere in the middle. To me, that's nonsense. It's false. All of politics operates under that premise, and it's false. Here's an example. I tell you. Are you in favor of respecting life? Are you against murdering people?
Yes.
Okay, so we agree that respecting life is good and attacking life, killing people, is bad. So these are two extreme positions. The idiots in the middle would say the optimal point is torture. Are you in favor of torture? Oh no. I mean, when you design policy based on ethical and moral terms, there is no room for error. And that's what we do. We design policies based on the ethics and morality of capitalism that is neither more nor less than the ethics and morality of Judeo-Christian values, the foundation of Western civilization. Therefore, there is no room for error. So, when the debate comes, we bring it to those terms. And it's very hard to side with torturers or murderers. That's why, let's say, 15% of the Chamber of Deputies with 9% of the Senate, we've implemented a structural reform 25 times larger than the most reformist government in history. That is why we are the most reformist government in history. That is why we are the best government in Argentine history, even if we've been a year and a half.
How do you balance those values, though, when it comes to Argentina's best interest versus your own values? And in this example, I'm going to use China. So China functions in a way that contradicts the way that you like to function. But as you said, it's a separate country, state business. But now, as the president, you have to balance those relationships relative to your values. And initially, you've called China I haven't got the exact quotes, but you were pretty critical towards China. And then that your approach has shifted since. How do you balance that, and how do you make those decisions?
Look, I treat this as a job. My job is to maximize the well-being of Argentines. The truth is that China has proven to be an excellent trading partner. Therefore, in defense of the interests of the Argentines, I have deepened my trade relationship with China. And in fact, before the agreement with the IMF was approved, China renewed the currency swap. Therefore, this for me is a job, and I have to get the job done. So it's not a question, let's say, about preferences or something. It's about what's best for the country. And the truth is that the Chinese have proven to be excellent partners.
I know you want to give advice to any specific countries, but if you look to the world, at the world as a whole, how worried are you about the global debt? And do you think that world leaders are in a position to do what it takes? Because, you know, what you've done is kind of one of a kind, and we haven't seen any other countries replicate it to that extent. And another part to this question, do you think the world needs to be shaken up? A lot of these economies need to be shaken up the same way you've shook up Argentine economy.
Again, each country has its own logic and makes its own choices. For example, my position on debt is rooted in my position on fiscal deficit. I mean, debt is ultimately caused by fiscal deficits, and only 5 countries in the world have financial balance. I can tell you this because, let's say, I am against the fiscal deficit. So, if you have a fiscal deficit, you have to finance it. Of course, if you finance it with debt, I find that abhorrent because debt is future taxes. So, it means that the current generation's party is being paid for by our children, grandchildren, even unborn generations, and those generations who cannot vote. Therefore, it seems profoundly immoral. That's why, let's say, during our government, in the first year, Argentina's debt dropped by more than $40 billion. So, tremendous data. So, we have a debt of 500 billion, and today it is 450 billion. I mean, we reduced the debt by about $50 billion. Not only that, but I also think the current taxes are bad. I think taxes are theft. Therefore, the size of the